Welcome back, folks, to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. We are podcasting on the COVID-19 crisis and how it's going to affect the lighting business. And we couldn't wait to talk to Antony Corrie. Met him at Strategies in Light, very knowledgeable guy, great leader. He is the CEO of Fulham Co. And he also happens to be the handsomest man in the lighting industry, Greg Ehrich.
Yeah, maybe most suave, handsome, whatever you want to call him. You'll see. Watch the video.
That British accent, man. You can't do that. You can't come to America looking like that and talking like that, Antony. No, but in all seriousness, folks, what a conversation. He started off real early managing this thing just simply because of his supply chain. He's so integrated in China. What a great way to start off our daily COVID, well, not daily, but almost daily COVID-19 series that we're going to be doing. So I'm going to let you guys get right to it. Oh, National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, always coming at you. These ones are brought to you by that. For right now, we got Antony Corrie on the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, Antony Corrie.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I've had a crazy day today. Not only is COVID-19 raging outside, but every single piece of audio, video equipment, and software has failed today. So there's obviously very important that we do this interview because something's trying to stop me from doing it.
Well, hopefully it's not a sign of things to come.
You know what? For me, good things are always preceded by all kinds of crazy problems like this. So this is a very good sign. You can ask Greg, when we started off the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, we had all manner of crazy, hokey things that would happen. So how is Fulham holding up in this crisis, Antony? I've seen your letters and we've seen, the California state come out with the state of emergency and lock everything down. You guys shut down or something and then reemerge to say that you're now shipping again. What's the situation?
Volatile is probably the best word. And it's changing by the hour. So in answer to your first question, we're holding up good. We're holding up well. Most importantly, we're a pretty sizable global organization with employees all over the world. And, first things first, our employees are all healthy. We've been watching this situation since early in the year, given we've got a pretty substantial operation in China. And then when everyone disappeared for Chinese New Year and came back, this whole thing unfolded. Since then, I'm glad to say that the whole team are fine. The whole China team are fine. No one's directly affected. No one's got coronavirus in the company yet. Touch wood. But it's very difficult to try and run a business and to manage a business, obviously under such unpredictable circumstances. And this, I'm not unique. This is every CEO running every company across the world right now is having the same problems that I'm having and asking the same questions and facing the same issues. So overall, we're holding up okay. And it's different from region to region in terms of what measures and restrictions we have in place, and I can describe those as we get into the podcast today.
So let me ask you this. When did it really hit you that COVID-19 was a leadership issue for Antony Corrie at Fulham?
3rd of February.
Okay. So you've been at this for a while.
Yeah. So Chinese Spring Festival and Chinese New Year obviously usually happens towards the end of January. For those unfamiliar with it, what generally happens is, anyone who lives in a cosmopolitan or a metropolitan city tends to go to their home province for Chinese Spring Festival to be with their family, just like we would at Christmas or at Thanksgiving or at Hanukkah or whatever, you would celebrate in other parts of the world. And there's mass transit across the country at that point in time. And people just flock from their workspace to go home and be with their family for a week, and then they come back. And while our team were, away for Chinese New Year, everything started to unfold. We were reading a lot of articles about this, and there was mixed messaging coming from the Chinese media as usual. But from our team, thankfully, we were getting a bit more direct input. And the team were due to come back to work. We have two operations in China, one in Beijing and one in Shanghai. Both pretty sizable operations with a lot of staff in both locations. And we were due to get back to work on the 3rd of February, which didn't happen. There was a lot of travel restrictions that were put in place to try and contain, at that point in time, wasn't really the mass communication about COVID-19. So a lot of people got stuck in their home provinces. Some made it back to Shanghai and Beijing. Some live in Shanghai and Beijing. But at that point in time, the return to work date was pushed from the 3rd of February to the 10th of February, and then another week to the 17th of February. So we're familiar with running through Chinese New Year, but the fact that it was pushed back a week and then another subsequent week was what really resonated with me, that this is a problem. We do have a big issue. And then throughout that time, I'd put kind of emergency conference calls in place with our team, just firstly to talk about their welfare and understand what's going on. And we had continued conversations throughout that 2-week period where we're in this almost hibernation mode. Everyone was at home. And then the government was starting to then put very extreme measures in. The Chinese government were putting very extreme measures in place to contain everyone in place. We were finding out about what it was like to try and get about in China, which was almost impossible. You had to get special permission to leave, to go to a supermarket or a grocery store. And then when you were leaving, you had to wear a mask, you had to have gloves on, you had to get your temperature testing done. On the inward part of going into a grocery store, they were allowing like 5 in, 5 out kind of strategy. And at that point in time, that's when I realized, well, this is a big deal, and this isn't, this is not just going to be a Chinese problem. I fly in and out of China 6-8 times a year. This is going to be a global problem just because of global transit and global commerce before we know it.
Well, let me ask you this before we get on, because that's a good place, because I wanted to ask you. So you realized early on that this was going to be a major supply chain issue for you. This was going to cause problems on the product side. Just on the non-lighting question side, did you have any intimations early on that this thing might get out of hand outside of China?
Just from personal experience and
anecdotally, like your gut said, what's going on here?
I knew it was going to spread, just because of global commerce and unfortunately, certain nations were slower to react and slower to stop the travel in and out of China, for economic reasons or for personal reasons or for whatever. So I thought this was going to spread beyond China relatively rapidly.
And so, when you were concerned about your staff, when did you decide to restart operations in China? And when did it, are you guys up to full speed at this point? So we took directive from federal and local government. So for example, in both Beijing and Shanghai, they have different mandates from the local government. Shanghai was a little more strict than Beijing in terms of their return to work policies. So Shanghai were first to come out with shelter in place for 14 days. And if you're coming back from your home province, so in a lot of circumstances, because travel was frozen in China, but by rail or air, a lot of people were confined in their home provinces until the 17th and beyond. So once they flew back to either Beijing or Shanghai, they then had to quarantine themselves for 14 days. And this was mandated by initially by Shanghai first. And then maybe a couple of weeks later, it came out from the Beijing government that said and enforced the same thing. Just from a common sense perspective, let's segregate anyone that's coming in from another area and make sure that they don't exhibit symptoms of COVID-19 before we allow them into work. So I think that's kind of the history of how it came about and how we've really tried to manage the situation, which was really
common sense by us and governmental, local government led by the government in China, who did, in my opinion, a very good job of trying to contain the spread of the disease as best they could under the conditions of their society. It's a different society to ours. It's a much more structured society, and when the government tells you to do something, you do it, because there's extreme ramifications if you don't.
Yeah, you don't have human rights the same way we do, and freedom comes with a cost, for sure.
Sure.
And so that you're looking at these different, even if you look at different European societies, they can be more structured than Western European societies, even. So it's not just Chinese. So then you're settling down the situation in China, and then along comes the situation into California. At what point did it go from being a Chinese problem to being an American problem for you?
In reality, about 10 days ago. I think in terms of our risk management, mitigation, and strategic planning as a business to try and operate through something unprecedented like this, thankfully, because we got such an early read on what was going on in China, we started to do a lot of simulation on what potentially may happen in the States, in Europe, in India, where we have another big operation. And we were very much, I think, we lent into the issue rather than ignored it. So when the announcements were made last week, we weren't surprised. It was a little earlier than we anticipated, but we weren't surprised. But we weren't really ready legally to kind of deal with that. We had a lot of contingencies in place to continue to manage the business under all different kinds of scenarios in terms of risk management, looking at kind of best case scenario all the way through to the worst case scenario and everything in between. So we have those plans ready to deploy and execute. I think the one thing that caught us off guard was just our ability, whether we could or could not, stay in some kind of operations. And we did that in, it took us about 24, 36 hours to make that determination after a lot of legal guidance. But once we got that determination, we obviously, executed on it. And that's the information that you saw that was a little confusing that came out. We were closed, and then we're now actually, we're somewhat operational. And I can describe that as we talk further.
So
go ahead, Greg.
All of your product located in California then, or do you guys have other warehouses around the country? Let's start with you.
Yeah. So in terms of our warehousing locations for North America, or for the Americas, actually, the primary warehouse is in Hawthorne, our corporate headquarters, just south of Los Angeles, 5 minutes from LAX. So we have a large warehousing facility there with a lot of finished goods. We also have another warehouse on the East Coast that serves the East Coast, but it's much less substantial in terms of its footprint and the products that we have there. But we do have a good blend of both products in both locations. There's just a lot more product in California.
Now you had to stop shipping as of March 20th, but now today, March 24th, you're able to ship again. Is that how it worked? Or?
Yeah. And let me kind of describe how that came about as well, because it's a really relevant question. So there's a government body called CISA. I don't know what it stands for, but these guys manage risk management for the United States. And CISA have defined 16 critical industries that need to continue to operate, need to, and that's important, during this kind of unprecedented circumstance. And there's a lot of, there's nuclear power in there, there's energy, there's healthcare, but there's a lot of other industries in there that we straddle and we serve as a business. And we actually sell into 9 of those 16 industries. And ostensibly that the main products that are deemed as essential and critical for Fulham are UV. For obvious reasons, UV kills germs, bacteria, and we sell into a lot of UV applications in water and air purification systems. Some of them governmentally sponsored, and the explosion in UV over the last week has been really interesting.
It's been ridiculous. We've seen it on our end as well, just on the distributor side.
Right.
All kinds of orders for weird CFLs and germicidal lamps.
It's coming back for sure.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that later, because the LED technology doesn't exist today that can have the cleaning density of UV from a traditional fluorescent perspective. Refrigeration for food and drugs. We serve one of our largest customers is a major refrigeration customer company, manufactures those products. So it's critical that we keep selling products into there. And then obviously our emergency lighting piece, all kinds of emergency lighting. And these product families combined are way more than 50% of our revenue as a business. So that's what led us from a legal perspective to make the determination to stay open and to keep shipping, again, with new restrictions in place in terms of the welfare of our team and so on. But it took us a while to come to that determination. We had an emergency board meeting on Friday, and there was 100% board consensus that we should continue. We need to doing this. We need to continue doing this, given the information that we just found.
Now, I know it'd be a logistical nightmare, but did it cross your mind at all to move all of your stuff from California to your East Coast or somewhere where you could ship?
It wouldn't fit. It wouldn't fit.
No. Okay. Yeah, that's what I figured.
It did. Yeah, it crossed our mind to do that. We thought about, can we get it into a 3PL that's elsewhere? But I think what we're experiencing in California ultimately will cascade throughout the rest of the country pretty quickly. So I think, there are different state-to-state restrictions going on, and let's hope that we can contain this thing before that happens. But I do think there'll be, some kind of mandated policy that will be in place for every single state in the United States and likely in Canada before we know it.
Well, I mean, in terms of that, I mean, as business owners, I see a lot of stuff on Twitter about, like a kind of the call out culture, the defiance culture, the opposite sides culture. People, on one hand, people are throwing parties, COVID parties. On the other hand, you see people screaming at leaders saying they're not enough. As a business owner, I look to the leaders. I look to the people in charge who are given the directions for me to help me make my decisions as a business owner. When you're talking with your lawyers in the legal department, which institution was it? The CISA institution that you got the information from that helped you make the decision, or which one was it?
Yeah, it was them. So they gave the directive to industry of which businesses can continue to operate. Obviously, getting someone from that particular department is very, very difficult. So it's more of prescriptive data, and then our legal team analyzing that information to come to the determination that we can continue to sell and to ship and to serve those particular markets.
And what would happen if your legal team was wrong and you are not one of these critical? I mean, are you guys guessing at this point that you're critical because you didn't hear anybody tell you that you could? You're just doing it.
There's risk associated with this, but we've took what we believe is a very, very calculated decision to continue to operate, given that it's considerably more than half of our revenue is representative by these product groups. So this isn't something that we just dreamt up, and we took very strong guidance on it before we made that decision. And there are ramifications if this was a fictitious thing that you were to do as a company. There's significant fines, there's jail time. There's
reputational issues as well.
Absolutely, and most importantly for us, Mike, it's how do we do this and maintain the safety of our employees? That's the most important bit.
For sure. Have you had a conversation with your CFO yet? And I hate to those are people that are open now, you're charging hard, but I called one of my vendors and he said, we're not making any money. It's better off if we shut down. Actually, that was his opinion. Simply because the level of orders that he was receiving and that, he felt that he didn't have a contribution to make to anything emergency or essential wise. So he felt it was better to shut down and just close the whole thing down until the crisis was over. Was that on when you said you looked at every option from this to that? Did the CFO step in and say, hey guys, maybe it's better that we just shut down for 3 weeks? Did that come up in the meeting?
We've spent the last 10 days modeling all different financial scenarios. So the CFO practically lives inside my computer right now. So yes, the answer is absolutely yes. And then my response would be, well, define shutdown. Shutdown could mean 100% furlough. It could mean drastic terminations. There's all different elements of managing and trying to preserve cash under a scenario like this that is unknown. We don't know how long this thing would go on. So yes, we've absolutely had all of those discussions. We've modeled out many scenarios, but as of now, we're continuing in operations.
Nice. Go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you feel that you'll see any production delays or receiving product now? What are you looking at on lead times for items that you don't have in stock that you need to have made?
Yeah, absolutely. Complicated answer, but I think it's important. So I think the most important thing to state is that the China manufacturing is almost back to capacity, and I think this is it's not just important from a business perspective. It's important for society to understand that China have managed to get their arms around this thing that spread like wildfire, contain it, nip it in the bud. And before you jumped on, Mike, I was just sharing with Greg. We have daily conference calls updating where we are relative to new infections and so on in China. And all of the new infections in the last kind of 4 or 5 days have been from visitors coming from outside back to China. That's how wild this thing is. So China have their own local infections, at least what we're being told. They have their own local infections under control. And all of those new infections are really foreigners that are flying into China now that are being contained and isolated for 14 days. So that's really, I think we can take stock from that as a global society to actually not panic too much, that if we follow the guidelines that are being rolled out now, that are wisely being rolled out, don't ignore them, follow them, do your part, otherwise you're part of the problem. And if we all follow those guidelines, we can actually get our arms around this. Let me get back to your original question, Greg. So about in terms of supply chain, almost all of our suppliers are fully back to work now in terms of operational capacity and capability and staff in those locations throughout China. One location in Shenzhen is struggling. They're at 60%. They'll be back to work maybe by late April, early May. But from an operational throughput and machinery and staff perspective, China's ready for business again. The tricky piece is the component supply chains waking back up and coming back on stream. And I spent 18 years in electronics prior to moving into digital lighting. And obviously those manufacturing locations are very binary in their ability to turn back on. They're either on and they're manufacturing in huge yields and huge volume, or they're kind of off. So what we found is as those supply chains start to wake back up and manufacturing starts again, there's pockets of distinct component shortage and allocation throughout the electronics industry, and all of those key components that provide all the widgets that build our products. I'll give you one stat. We've got, I don't want to say the number, but we've got a large amount of open backlog as a business, orders open on our suppliers right now, and we have less than 10% of that as confirmed with confirmed delivery dates.
Wow!
So we're managing it one week and 1 month at a time right now. Thankfully, we're a business that invests in inventory. We've got a significant amount of it. We have product in transit and on the water. Now that's slowed down obviously during this situation, but the ports are open again. Air freight is tricky. but the ports are now moving product from manufacturing locations into North America, where we're predominantly most of our sales are being done and where most of our warehousing is done. So that's starting to flow again. But what is unpredictable is the kind of 2 to 3 months out of the supply chain. We really don't have a good grip on what's confirmed and unconfirmed at this point in time.
The other thing to that, Anthony, is that is there going to be any demand? That's the other side.
That's another really good question. I think time will tell. As we continue, a lot of companies will be closing down. Will demand slow down, and will that free up product availability because of that? As it works its way up the supply chain. Really good point, Mike.
The other thing too is in a shrinking market, you can grow by players exiting the market, right? But there's a real reason that players will exit the market, right? So it takes guts, man. And in a time like this, are you pulling back from purchasing? Are you saying hold off? Are you saying no, give us our stuff, we're moving forward?
We're being selective about which products we're more aggressive on. And we're being selective about which we shouldn't be so aggressive with. UV is just woken up. It's like a sleeping dragon's just finally come back to life. And the inquiries that we've had in the last week have been like nothing we've seen before. The volumes, government-sponsored projects, and so on.
What specifically are you guys doing in UV that you have the demand for?
Air and water purification. So our UV ballasts go into air conditioning systems and water purification systems across all kinds of industry, many into healthcare, and healthcare is the one that's really starting to wake up. But we've had a lot of recent inquiries in the last week of numbers that are we've never seen before.
Now
so
we're
obviously looking at our UV product portfolio and figuring out, well, we've had a more predictive flatline demand curve over the last year, 2 years, that looks like it's going to be an exponential growth line. So to wake that supply chain up like that is really difficult, because we've got components often that are on 3, 4, 5 month lead times. We've got to prime the pump in manufacturing. So to turn that on overnight is certainly no small feat.
Now you said you go to China 6 to 8 times a year. You have. When do you think the next time is that you'll go?
I couldn't answer that right now. I think it'll be months for sure. It'll be months, and I think the biggest risk is inbound flights into China right now. We don't have anything in Hubei province in terms of our own operations, but we do have some of our supply chain that comes out of Hubei province in terms of components and so on. But even Hubei province is now getting, a little bit more back to normal as a place to live and work and operate.
Well, I think they unlocked Hubei today, but Wuhan is still on lockdown.
Yeah, correct.
I think that's where it's at. Yeah, I really feel awful for those people. I mean, that's a long time, man. And if people here in Canada are complaining about a lockdown, they haven't seen what a Chinese lockdown is like, bro.
Right.
It's a completely different situation. Where do you in all of this, I sense behind it all and in your voice some trepidation, but also some optimism, Anthony. Why do I sense that from you? I see you're seeing it as an opportunity, or look at that, the twinkles in the eye. I mean, you're seeing something.
My problem, man. My wife tells me all of the time, I'm the glass 3/4 full guy. And she kind of tempers my optimism sometimes for very, very good reason and says, bring it back to reality. But I think in answer to your question, I think I'm optimistic if we as a society respond appropriately to the directives that we're being given, and we do what we're asked to be doing. We don't do stupid things. We can contain this. And some of the data that I saw yesterday, if we do self-confine and we're at home, the ability to transmit the virus from 1 to 100 people will be massively limited to, I think it was 15. I looked at some data. It was on BBC News last night. So rather than mass transmit of that, the avalanche effect and the exponential curve of it growing will absolutely slow down. So I think fundamentally, I believe in that. If we do it as a society, if we do our piece as humans to protect one another, irrespective of business, we owe it to each other not to screw up the world, the planet. We're all citizens of the world. So I'm hoping that people will respond appropriately to that. And then secondly, just the business climate, the fact that it's recovered so quickly in China, and is almost getting back to normal. I have a call with our sales team tomorrow night, really to understand what it's like on the ground, what's demand like, what are our customers telling us. The fact that it is rebounding and coming back also gives me a sense of optimism that we can recover and we can get back there. But make no doubt about it. I don't think everyone's going to make it. I don't think every company is going to make it through this. Some may not have the cash flow to ride this thing out. Drastic responses are probably going to be seen from many companies to try and make sure that the company is preserved and can kind of be born out of the other side of this thing.
I think some people ask themselves if it's worth it after all they've been through in the last 10 years. I think there's some companies that are just never mind COVID-19, that are just completely worn out and exhausted by the last 10 years of constant change and new products, and they're heavy and they're tired. And this might just be the straw that breaks the camel's back, Antony.
You're probably right. I think we'll probably see some of that.
And so we need some new leaders in the lighting industry. I've liked a lot of the stuff you said today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I feel it's interesting. I was wondering what I was going to get from the conversation, but the first person that popped into my head was to talk to you, just simply because of what we talked about at the last convention that we met. I think it was Strategies in Light. And then, also, I know you talked a lot about China then, and I thought, gosh, we should talk to Antony about this. So I really appreciate you being a guest on the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Stay safe.
It's the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, man.
That's what's bringing you all these special episodes. That's why we do this, because our discussions we have, we need to figure it out. Get a grip on the industry.
Get a grip, man. Thanks for listening, folks. Check it out. Should be one coming out tomorrow again.